Okay, you all, Jason here, and welcome back to the channel as we travel the narrow trail. Today I'm going to share with you a 3-month review fully of the Ibis Ripmo version 3. I'm going to share with you all the benefits of this version 3, and the question is, should you get this over the Ibis HD6? Well, let's talk about it. Alright, so the Ripmo is now in its 3rd generation, I guess we could call it. It came out July the 16th, and it has a really strong fan base, and many have kept their eye on the bike due to the strong popularity. It's known for its ability to climb so well, or extremely well actually, while also having an ability to move around like a cheetah on wheels, which means it's very playful, it loves to jump, and turn quickly due to the agility. However, it's also been known to handle descents really well, especially with the 2nd generation that updated the geometry to steep descents crowd. And it was raced by the Ibis team in the Enduro as well. But today, 3 months later, is this bike still what it's known for? I will say yes, and if you watch the whole video through, I'm gonna share with you toward the end some hidden features that are not being talked about. So hang in there. Now quickly, the build quality is actually very nice. The carbon frame has some really nice looking lines. So aesthetically, as I said in the previous video, it just looks really, really nice. And the paint job really shows off those lines really well. They both come in like a satin finish. So make sure you get some 3M paint protection to cover that nice paint job. Now in the past, some had been critical that Ibis should have sold the Ripmo with a Float X, especially the version 2 Ripmo, and that it should have come with a Fox 36. Now, it did come with the Float X2 and a Fox 38, but today, this Ripmo, it comes with a Fox Float X shock and a Fox 36. I will now be critical with that as the bike deserves much more burlier parts. This version 3 does. So, I think they should have put this bike with the Fox 38 and the Fox X2. I think the issue is the internal frame storage was why they went with lighter parts to just lower that weight. I personally would have preferred no frame storage and bigger parts, or burlier parts, shall we say. The bike comes in a small, medium, and the new extra medium, they're calling it, a large, and then extra large. Now, I think of these sizes this way. The extra medium is basically a large with a very much longer reach to it. And the large is more of an extra large, and that XL size is more of an extra large size. Now, I stand at 5'10", and I went with the extra medium on this one. The reach is long though, at 478 millimeters. So coming off the medium SB 160, which has a reach of 465, that increase of 13 millimeters on this Ripmo, it's very noticeable. I didn't feel too strange on it, but I did some things to mitigate this reach and fit the bike's cockpit to what I like. Here's some of the tricks that I did. I went with riser bars, which does reduce the reach. These are the Loam carbon bars that have a 38 millimeter rise, and they have a 10-degree back sweep, so it pulls the bar back closer to you with that bigger back sweep. This all reduces the reach by bringing the bars up and back. Now, riser bars have become really popular right now. They're all the rage as many new mountain bikes are being created with lower stacks for more of an attack position, which causes you to stay leaning forward. I also went from a 40 millimeter stem to a 32 millimeter stem. The next thing I did to reduce the reach was run a 170 millimeter fork, which is perfectly fine for this Ripmo. This also reduces the reach because it's raising the bike up and back towards you again. The last thing I did was run a taller steerer tube. Now there's a new stem getting good reviews. It's called the Raise Reverse Stem. Look it up if you're interested. But this is my take in that same sort of stem, but in a different way. What I do with this is when I get a brand new fork, I leave the steer tube tall, and then I ride it that way until I settle on the right rise that I like. For me, I typically settle on a rise between 9 of the 5 millimeter spacers stacked on top of each other. This raises the stack height It reduces the reach and it creates a more comfortable, what's known as rad for the bike. Shout out to Lee McCormick. Heal up quick, man. All right, so let's talk about climbing. I did in the beginning find this bike to be keeping me a little bit more forward, and I believe that's done to keep the front wheel down when climbing. With, of course, I mentioned this bike in the extra medium has a longer reach, so I felt myself leaning forward more. However, with the tweaks that I made, I'm now able to sit further back, feel a little bit more comfortable when climbing without compromising with any wheel wander. What helps with all of this is the 76.5 or 77 degree seat tube angle that this Ripmo version 3 has. It puts you in a prime position for climbing. Now, we add to that the new DW Link suspension, and it really surges you forward, and it doesn't wallow in any of the rocks. It also doesn't get bounced around much in the techie climbs. It does give you more traction, and with the right tire setup, you're gonna smile for days, as this DW Link will destroy any technical climbs with ease. I have never, and I mean never, used the lockout on this shock. It's truly unnecessary. And for tires, in this particular video here, I was running the Continental Cryptotol in the front and then the Cryptotol rear. But now I have switched to a WTB Verdict 2.5 in front, and I put the Taki-chan in the rear. And this mix brands gives great traction that bites into the dirt, loves techie climbs, loose turns, jagged rocks. Now let's talk descending. This Ripmo is noticeably much more capable than the outgoing version 2 that it's replacing. It is noticeable, but yes, there is a con. If you're looking for that plush Ripmo to just track all the down rocky hill terrain, super janky stuff, this isn't exactly that. You will still feel the trail, and you're gonna have the bouncing around, but it's not gonna be as much skipping across the trail as the version 2 Ripmo did. The suspension feels much more smoother when you're flying through that janky stuff. Now, if you're saying, well, you know, I wanted this Ripmo to be super stable, I wanted full traction, do it all bike. Well, I have a solution for you that I shared with you in the beginning, and I'm gonna talk to you about that coming up here shortly in the end. Now, the head tube angle on this Ripmo, it's a 64.5, which is a half degree slacker than the version 2 Ripmo it replaces. I run my version 3 with, I said, a 170 millimeter fork, and that makes it now 64 degrees in the head tube angle. Now, the ability to get into the mid-stroke, especially for the suspension setup that I use, makes it feel super supple off the top. And the bike also has a longer wheelbase, which adds stability for steep, janky descents. It's also quite easy to change lines, lift up the front, jump off of small features, carve and weave for a really fun experience. All that the Ripmo has been known for, it's kept all of that alive in this iteration. Now, I will say this, even for going to a 170 millimeter fork, it hasn't affected the climbing. Climbing is still exceptional. So what about tame flat trails? Some people really enjoyed the version 1 Ripmo, version 2 Ripmo, and they'd say, well, I could get it off on some really tame, super easy trails, and it was still fun to ride. Well, this frame is actually not much heavier than the old V2 Ripmo. It carries more weight. It's due to that frame storage to beef up the frame. So when you want frame storage and you make a hole in the frame, well, it's got to be strengthened, which means more carbon, adding more weight, and being that the weight isn't that much more, the build is still a very playful bike, even strolling in easy trail situations. It doesn't feel like a chore to ride this bike on the really tamer stuff, or like you're riding on mud. You see, the bike strikes a balance in agility and stability. Some may not like that term. They want agility, but they want maximum stability. The issue with the Ripmo is that it feels like getting past the mid-stroke support. When you get past that mid-stroke support, it gets really stingy with the travel. So it doesn't blow through its travel easily. But this allows you to run less air pressure or to remove some tokens in the shock. But you can only go so far with that. So that leads to this. I want to make a disclaimer though before I share this. I actually do not know what Ibis would think about what I'm about to share with you. So as you know, the version 3 Ripmo, it comes equipped with 150 millimeters of travel and a rear shock that is a 230 by 60. However, what I have run or been testing on this bike and done very successfully is 160 millimeters of travel. What? Yes, you heard it right, 160 millimeters of travel. Here's how this works. This rear shock is 230 by 60. I run the RockShox Vivid, or I also have a 2025 Super Deluxe Ultimate. Now the eye to eye is the length, that's what that 230 millimeters is. This is the distance of the mounting points on the shock. Now what that 60 millimeters means is the stroke length of the shock. It's how far the shock travels between fully compressed and fully back. Now RockShox has a shaft assembly that it sells to increase the travel in each of their different shocks. Yeah, I don't really know how Fox does it. I think they have travel reducers that you have to remove. Instead of going through all of that sort of stuff, I just bought a brand new shock. So the new shock I purchased is a 230 by 65. This takes the travel to 160 millimeters. So what's been the outcome with that? Well, the Ripmo works actually very well with this, and there's a very nice clearance in the rear. As you can see here, the rear tire is not even close to touching the seat tube when it's fully compressed, so there's no damage that's going to happen to your seat tube. You can also do this. You can also run the rear shock at 230 by 62.5. If you do this, it's going to give you an added 5 millimeters more, and you'd be at 155 millimeters of travel. Okay, so let me get more into how does it ride? How does it perform like this? Now, some would say kinematics. These are the numbers you're going to see on paper, the way the engineers designed the bike. So with kinematics, you would probably say it wouldn't be good for the design of this bike. But as you know, there's always what's on paper, and then there's real world experience. So the climbing is still really impressive. There's actually, and I'm giving the honest truth here, there's no noticeable decline. I have set times climbing on this bike with it set at 160 millimeters of travel that I did when I was on the SB160. I've just blown those climbing times out of the water with this bike at 160. So when I'm telling you the climbing is not suffering at all, it is not. And probably just as good as it does at 150. I don't see the difference. I really don't. Now remember, this bike is still functioning in that 230 millimeter eye to eye, and that's from eyelet to eyelet. So what we're gaining is a small amount of travel. As you look at the picture here, you can have 150 millimeter travel fully compressed, and then we have the 160 millimeter shock fully compressed. The difference is small enough that I don't feel the kinematics affected negatively, but descending is where you really feel this extra travel shine, and it gives a feeling of a coil. It really does, like you're in a coil environment. The small bump compliance on all of the RockShox stuff is actually far superior than Fox's. So when you go from the Super Deluxe Ultimate to a Vivid, and we'll feel a slight improvement in small bump compliance, but going from the 150 to the 160, totally can tell a very supple off the top suspension functionality. Those of you though who want to hold the rear traction, this is it. It tracks impressively well over the downhill repetitive jank, and it still holds that progressive feeling at the end. This means you can run faster speeds with more traction, giving a confidence-inspiring feeling on fast downhill sections of your trails. So those of you complaining that you wanted the HD6 to be full 29, and you wouldn't even consider the HD6 because it's a mullet, well then this trick is probably for you. It's a full 29er, not exactly 165 millimeters of travel like the HD6, but it is 160 millimeters, and with a 170 millimeter fork, this will quite soothe your cravings. I'm pretty convinced it will. So again, I'm telling you, I run a Vivid, but I also still have that Super Deluxe Ultimate, which gives the bike a more springy, playful feel. The Vivid gives you more traction, coil-like shock, but they're both really excellent shocks for this bike. Okay, so who's this bike for? I'm gonna make the claim that this bike is the most versatile bike I have seen out there. Y'all know this bike can become the Ripley. What do I mean by that? So if you don't know, the Ripmo frame is the same frame that's on the Ripley. All you have to do is purchase the rear clevis from Ibis, and I believe it's around $40. I'll put the correct price here on the screen. And you switch out that clevis, you have a Ripley frame. So yes, you will have to buy another rear shock, and you will have to buy another front fork. But to buy a shock and a fork and have a completely new bike that can be between you're spending maybe $1,200 to $1,300 more, and you have two bikes, hey, it's a great deal. I'm gonna add another caveat. What I've done to bump the travel up to 160, I suspect you can run a Ripley at 140 millimeters of travel by running a 210 by 55 shock. But I've not tested that yet. I would surmise it makes more of a rowdier Ripley. If you have a Ripley at 140, might as well just get a Ripmo at 150, but I don't know, that's up to you to decide. Now, further flexibility, you can run the Ripmo with 27.5 wheel in the back, so you can mullet this bike. And lastly, you can unlock that hidden travel to bump up to 160 millimeters by changing the rear shock. So truly, this is a Swiss Army knife of a bike. 150 millimeters, 155 or 160, what do you want to run it at? You want 29er or you want 27.5? You want to bump it back down to go to Ripley? What do you want? There's count them out. There's several possibilities. So you decide. You just have to keep another shock on hand, like I said. So for me, I'm keeping my two shocks. I have the Vivid on here at 160, and I have my Super Deluxe Ultimate, which is set at 150, and I can swap these in and out. It takes literally 5 minutes. And so I have two bikes. I've got a 150 bike or a 160. What trails am I gonna go out there to? Now, my Ripmo build, it's in another video. See the link up here on the top. But I have set this Ripmo up to be pretty much enduro. The Ripmo, again, it blurs so many lines in what it does. Some bikes are one-trick pony. Some are enduro focused only, some are downhill only, some are cross-country only. Some of those big bikes, you get them on a tame trail and it's like a sloth in mud. But the Ripmo can be a trail bike, it can be an all-mountain bike, it can be a light enduro bike, or if you set it up like mine, it could be a full enduro bike. It's gonna be ready for practically any trail that you put it on, giving you maximum satisfaction, confidence, fun, and many smiles. Okay, last but not least, I want everybody to know that everything you're seeing in this build here, I paid for myself. No one gave me any of these parts for free. However, I do want to say this. I cannot recommend N+1 bikes enough. That's where I purchased all of my stuff. I always go through them. But maybe now you've seen this video and it's like, but now that I see this, I'm over the top. I want to buy this bike. So I cannot recommend Sean at N+1 Bikes enough. Call N+1 Bikes, ask for Sean, tell him Jason sent you, and let me tell you, he's the largest Ibis dealer in the United States of America. I've worked with him since he was just a small dealer, and he's treated me every time extremely well. And he's been a supporter of my channel. Like, I can't recommend him enough to you guys. Everybody who's come to the channel, seen my videos, gone and purchased a bike, you know, they message me back and they just tell me, man, that was a great call. I'm gonna buy another bike from him again. That guy is fantastic. You can also check me out on Instagram. Look for Travel the Narrow Trail on Instagram. Okay, everyone, have you been considering one? Are you on the fence? Or were you thinking about the HD6? Did this video help you to not purchase an HD6? Let me know your thoughts. Hopefully this video helped you. I'll share more of my updates as I go. Any more upgrades I find out or any tricks, I'll share that. So at this point, I'm just gonna tell you, get out there and ride.